It's the biggest baseball series in Iowa City in decades. Oregon comes to town, Iowa with the chance to clinch the regular season crown. We break it down today with the man on the beat, Kyle Huesmann, Locked On Hawkeye.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent, Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. I've been covering the Hawkeyes for over 20 years on the radio here in the great state of Iowa, including currently on the Iowa Sports Radio Network. We have stations all across the state. Sioux City, the Quad Cities, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, and our flagship station, 106.3 KXNO in Des Moines. You can hear me each weekday talking the world of sports, including the Hawkeyes from noon to 2 with Ken Miller. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, today we have Kyle Huesmann joining us from Hawkeye Report, part of On3 Media. Excited to get Kyle in here to talk some Iowa baseball, along with some women's basketball, his two main beats over there at Hawkeye Report. And we'll get into that all today with Kyle. Kyle, good to see you. And well, I've heard the voice plenty of times before. Read all your writing over at Hawkeye Report. Good to see your face. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for the baseball this week. Thanks for having me on the show. It's good to always discuss some baseball, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But just really excited for what is, like you said at the beginning, just really potentially the biggest series in a couple of decades here in Iowa City.
Yeah, it's crazy. And coming into this year, as you know, expectations were low after the disappointment of 2024, the talk of preseason top 25. Can this team make a run to a regional, super regional, even college World Series? And they don't even make the NCAA tournament. To me, on the surface, the biggest change is what happened with the pitching coach and the change that was made there. So as you know, the ins and outs, obviously, of Iowa baseball a whole lot deeper than certainly myself and a lot of our listeners out there. Go right there. Take us at the top there, and a big change that was made by Coach Heller coming into the season.
Yeah, I think that was kind of one of the big things was the pitching coach change to Sean Kenny, who comes over, most recently at Houston before Iowa, but he'd been around the block with a number of programs, was at Maryland with Eric Bakich in the ACC. And then when Bakich moved to Michigan, Kenny went with him to Michigan and was in the Big Ten, and has some experience out on the West Coast, was at Georgia for 6 or 7 years. So he has SEC experience. So, when he was initially hired, it felt like someone that not only had a wealth of knowledge from a number of years through, back into the 90s when baseball was pretty different then to now, to kind of go through that change to what baseball is now, but also just across the country, different conferences, different levels of Division I baseball. I felt like it was going to be a good match, and it has been. But to the pitcher's credit, it's not all Sean Kinney. They've done their job of getting to work in the off season, and they wanted to make changes as soon as that season ended, because they knew what happened with the pitching staff last year wasn't going to work again this year if they wanted to make the NCAA tournament. But to your point, yeah, the expectations coming to the year were a little bit lower, obviously, than last year. But I would say that the thing that happened is there was a lot of optimism with a lot of the spots, some of the additions, some of the new faces, things like that. And it seems like, every question that needed to be answered prior to the season, for the most part, everyone has been answered in some way, shape, or form, which was, maybe a little bit unexpected. But, I'm not necessarily surprised by anything that has happened. It's just kind of all come together in a way that you didn't think everything was going to come together as well as it did, or as quickly as it did. But yeah, certainly a season that I don't think many people expected. Maybe some people around the program thought they could be this good, but I don't think anyone, outside of Iowa City would have expected what's happened this year.
They get off to a bit of a slow start, but have really caught fire here in the Big Ten. Now, a lot of people look at this on the cusp of a regular season championship. They win the series at minimum. They're going to be in a tie for that one, depending on what happens with UCLA this week in a sweep. And they're the outright winners, regardless of what happens in that one. Yet people look at it and say, well, how can they be on the bubble with that kind of resume? Well, the resume is more than just what you do in the Big Ten. And even when you dive a little bit deeper, Kyle, that's the thing that jumps off the page to me is you see, yeah, there's some nice series wins. Obviously, the sweep at Michigan, that was absolutely monstrous for them. But this has not been the most difficult Big Ten slate for Iowa baseball this year either.
Yeah, I think a lot of, really when you start talking about RPI and why they're on the bubble, I think some of it goes back to early season. You mentioned the slow start. A couple of close losses. South Florida's a pretty solid team this year, but you lose 2 out of 3 there. If it was, had they won 2 out of 3, maybe things are a little bit different. But the one that stands out is certainly, losing 3 of 4 to Washington State down there in Claiborne, Texas, at the neutral site. And it's tough for northern teams, especially Iowa, to travel for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. The travel for that week was tough. It's the third week on the road to start the season. So I believe Iowa would have won 2, maybe even 3 of those had it been in Iowa City. But that's just kind of the way it goes with the travel aspect. And they didn't get it done that week. Lost 3 or 4 to Washington State, and that's a series that is still hurting them to today. A couple of midweek losses, which always tend to happen. But like you said, they've done enough work in Big Ten play to kind of even out some of that stuff. Some of the midweek losses are still things that are hurting them to this point a little bit. But like you said, the sweep over Michigan was huge. The sweep over Indiana was huge, and even the other ones like Minnesota and Ohio State. Some of those teams that aren't as good RPI, to be able to sweep them and avoid any losses has really helped them to this point. But yeah, certainly a big opportunity here with Oregon coming to town. They're up to 19 in the RPI now, so that's going to be a big opportunity. And at the Big Ten tournament, they'll certainly have some opportunities as well. But yeah, I think it has been a little bit easier of a Big Ten slate. But as we all know, no matter what conference you're in, it's hard to sweep weekends in whatever conference you're in. And winning 2 out of 3 should always be the goal. And Iowa, for the most part, has done that this year. Outside of just one series against Washington.
And bounce back with a big win on Sunday in that series. They try to do the same here this weekend and get the series win this time against Oregon. We're going to get into that series here in just a little bit as we're joined by Kyle Huesmann from Hawkeye Report. Kyle, you broke some news last night, and that had to deal with Ben Willis, a guy that I saw a ton in his days here in Central Iowa, playing high school baseball, called a ton of his games. He was part of that program at Johnston that, boy, they just churn them out, don't they? And guys that grind away. So you termed it, or Coach Heller maybe termed it, limited availability for the series coming up against Oregon and likely for the rest of the season. Tell us exactly what you know, what you can pass along, and Willis, a big part of the top of the lineup there for the Hawkeyes.
Yeah, it was an injury that happened just at the tail end of that tie against Oregon State in the series finale there in Des Moines. Top of the 10th inning, went after a foul ball that just went into foul territory, but Principal Park has the bullpens on the field. Tried to make a sliding catch and kind of slid awkwardly into Iowa's bullpen mound. I will say it didn't look great, the way that he slid when I saw it happen. The trainer came out, Rick came out and, talked to him, and Ben stayed in the game, had a noticeable limp when he tried to kind of jog it off, but stayed in the game and then, finished out the game. He was actually the last at bat of the tie, flew out to right field. But yeah, I don't know specifics of the injury. I do know that, probably a leg injury, something like that, the lower extremity injury was what it was termed. But limited availability to me says he's not going to probably be in the starting lineup and maybe a pinch hitter, maybe a late inning guy if he's able to come into the game. But limited availability means that they're probably going to be without their leadoff hitter this weekend, potentially, the Big Ten tournament, the postseason and altogether. We'll have to see what happens there. But yeah, certainly a big loss. Ben's had a very solid year. And really the last 2 weeks, even though the offense has been struggling just a little bit, Ben, 10 hits in his last 6 games. So he's been hitting the ball pretty well. Just kind of that steady guy at the top of the lineup. And, if he isn't able to go against Oregon, it'll be tough, just not only for the team, but for him, because as you mentioned, a Johnston guy, an Iowa guy that's been around this program and has really done everything for this program that he could. He came in as an infielder. He was an infielder. He was the emergency catcher at one point. He's played outfield. The only thing that he hasn't done is pitch. So, I'm hoping that he gets a chance to whether it's come in late in games or something like that, or potentially Big Ten tournament, something like that. But if he can't, it's probably going to be Kellen Strohmeyer in left field and Andy Nelson in right field. Those would be the two that I would think would just take over in the outfield. Maybe Ben Swales at second base. He's been kind of splitting time with Andy Nelson. So I would say the good thing is that Iowa has enough depth that no matter what lineup you put out there, it's not a lineup where you have to throw someone out there that's only started a couple of games or only had a few at bats. They have some guys that have a number of games under their belt. Kellen Strohmeyer started for the last 5 games. Obviously, Andy Nelson's a veteran on this team, and if Ben Swales has to move and be the starter at second base in every game, he's already started over 30 games. So there's nothing really crazy with the lineup changes other than that you would lose your leadoff hitter, and Ben Willis has been a really steady guy for them atop the batting order.
Well, this weekend, it's Oregon coming to town. The Ducks come in, a top 10 team, going to help the RPI if Iowa can get some wins. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the math behind it and what's it going to take for Iowa to solidify themselves in the NCAA tournament. We'll do that as we're joined by Kyle Huesmann from Hawkeye Report. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. I'm a Timberwolves fan. I've been watching this team and love the chance of them maybe closing things out tonight. You think back home, hey, it's Naz Reid time. He's going to bounce up. You can play those prop bets, put it together. You can even do it live in game based on how the action is all unfolding. Love that part of FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head over to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. With FanDuel, make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Trent Condon back with you once again on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, joined today by Kyle Huesmann from Hawkeye Report as we take a look at things. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. And a shout out to our everydayers with us each and every day. We bring you a new podcast every day here throughout the course of the week. Kyle, it's Oregon coming to town, and Oregon's good. We saw last weekend, I think, against Oregon State, that gap between good, solid Big Ten teams, and you move up that tier. And we saw that against the Beavers. And I think we're going to see the same thing against Oregon. What makes this Ducks team so good? And they appear to be red hot on top of it coming in, not just talented, but playing really good baseball.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, 14 of their 17, won 14 of their last 17 games, and those aren't bad teams that they're beating. You know, they took 2 of 3 from UCLA. They swept Oregon State in 4 games. And then they just swept Washington this past week. And the one thing I will say is that the only game during that stretch that really stands out as a road win is the midweek one that they went down to Corvallis and won against Oregon State. UCLA was at home. Washington was at home. They had a double midweek against St. Mary's that they won kind of during that stretch. So maybe that's the one thing is that they've kind of gotten some of those big games at home that they've been able to win. So certainly Iowa not close to home for them, but as you said, playing really good baseball. And what stands out with them is their home run hitting. I mean, they're 7th in the country in home runs with 96. Mason DeVille, their DH/outfielder, has 26 home runs. He leads the country in home runs. Jacob Walsh, their first baseman, has 17 home runs, but they've got guys with 15, with 13, with 11 home runs. So it's not just one guy doing the home runs for them. And the other thing that stands out about this team is that they strike out a little bit, but they also get on base via the walk, hit by pitches. 350 walks and hit by pitches this year and 368 strikeouts. So, I mean, nearly a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of, getting on base with the free bases compared to strikeouts. And you don't necessarily see that a lot with teams that hit a lot of home runs. Usually there's more strikeouts with that. But they can do both. They can hit the home runs, but they can also get on base in other ways. And Dwayne Banks Field is one that can lend itself to be more offensive in the summer. So we'll see, where the wind's blowing. It's going to be hot, so that's going to lend itself to some offense. But yeah, I mean, Oregon, a great offense and pitching staff wise, they're second in the Big Ten in ERA. Their left-hander Grayson Grinsell, who's going to go on Thursday, not Friday, Thursday, because that's when we're starting this week. Potentially a Big Ten Pitcher of the Year candidate. I think it'll go to Joseph Durwell from Michigan State, but Grinsell over his last 4 starts has completed at least 7 innings in all 4 starts. He had a complete game against UCLA. So a guy they really lean on to give him a good start to the weekend. And certainly if you have a guy that can go 7-8 innings, that helps your bullpen for the rest of the series. So he's kind of the one that leads them out of the pitching staff side. But yeah, I mean, Oregon's up into the top 10, looking at whatever poll you want. I mean, D1 baseball has them up to 5th, and they've had some impressive wins down the stretch, and it's going to be a tough series for Iowa. What I will say is I thought, they battled with Oregon State more than the 0-2 and 1 tie would show. Couple errors on Friday that I think if they make those plays, they probably win the game. Saturday they got beat. That was probably the one that you would point to and say that was just Oregon State was better that day. And then certainly the tie on Sunday, Iowa could have won that one had they gone another inning or 2 or whatever it took. So I think that series was a little bit closer. Iowa made some uncharacteristic errors in that one, but those errors, those things, whether it's a free base here or there or an error, you can't do that against a team like Oregon with the home run power that they have. If they're going to hit a home run, it's got to be a solo home run or a 2-run home run. It can't be, what we saw against Oregon State, the 5 runs on 1 hit because there were free bases and they hit a grand slam. That's certainly something that you can't do against Oregon. So that'll be the point this week is, clean fielding, not giving up errors, and then certainly cutting down on the free bases this week.
Oregon's really talented, really good. A win against Oregon. So let's just play Oregon takes 2 out of 3. You've been doing the math on the RPI, what that would do for Iowa when we look at it, because the resume still needs work, and they would go in, I think, to the Big Ten tournament still with work to do. If they get at least a game, though, against the Ducks this weekend, is that basically neutral as it pertains to the RPI?
Yeah, I unfortunately, I don't think so. Just the way that, obviously they don't get a chance to beat Oregon State. Had they beat Oregon State, they might have been 60, 61 in the RPI. Right now they're at 65. So I think you lose 2 out of 3 from Oregon. I think you're probably looking at same spot, maybe even down a spot or two. And 66, 67 going to the Big Ten tournament without a Big Ten regular season title is probably not going to be good enough. And I would think that would be a scenario where you might have to win the Big Ten tournament to get into the NCAA tournament. But you look at the other side, and if Iowa does get 2 out of 3, you're probably looking at getting them up around 60 in the RPI, potentially a little bit higher than that. And they would have a share of the Big Ten title at that point. Then you start looking at, how many wins can you get at the Big Ten tournament? I think winning their pool at that point, going 2-0 in pool play, would potentially give them an NCAA tournament spot at that point. But unfortunately, not getting the game against Oregon State, having to tie that one, even the Friday game where they give up a few errors, those are the ones that it might come back to haunt them if they were to lose 2 out of 3 from Oregon this weekend. So I think NCAA tournament wise, getting 2 out of 3 this weekend is really, I don't want to say a must, but potentially a must.
So you mentioned the Big Ten tournament, and we'll see where Iowa exactly fits in there, but they have solidified themselves as a top 4 seed. The structure of this one. Now, my daughter plays USSSA softball, getting to know this, and usually it's run differential, runs scored, the different tiebreakers in pool play. So they go with this pool play structure, but none of that stuff matters. I mean, you can win a game 15-1, but if everybody's 1-1 across the board, it's just going to come down to the better seed. Do you like the structure? Let's start right there. Somebody that follows, obviously, collegiate baseball. Do you like the structure that they put together here for the Big Ten tournament?
Yeah, I mean, first off, they went with the 8-team system, which was fine until you added 4 more teams, and you just couldn't have 8 teams making it in a 17-team, conference. I mean, that just wouldn't be fair. So I liked the expansion to 12 teams. I think 12 teams is good. The pool play format, I don't mind it. There are going to be some games that don't matter. Because you're going to have teams that know they had to go 2-0 and they aren't going to be 2-0 or not going to be 1-0 going into that second game. But I don't mind it. Like you said, the run differential to me shouldn't matter in this tournament. You just played a 30-game conference slate to see where you filled out. If you got a top 4 spot, you deserve the reward for playing 30 games and earning that top 4 spot. It shouldn't come down to 2 games and, this team won 9-1 and we only won 5-1. To me, that's not fair if you're going to play a 30-game schedule to figure out who is atop the standing. So, as you mentioned, Iowa is going to be a top 4 seed. I don't believe they can go lower than 3, and I don't think they're going to go lower than 2. So they're gonna have an opportunity to potentially get through if they go 1-1, which like I said, I believe that's the reward for playing a 30-game schedule and earning that top 4 seed. But it is different because, as you said, almost everything else that you go through, there's tiebreakers, whether it's run differential or runs scored or something like that. But I don't mind the pool play format. I do like that they're giving the top 4 seed that advantage. It makes that race for the top 4 seed really exciting because the difference between finishing 4th or 5th is gigantic, potentially gigantic. So yeah, I think the format's different. We'll see how it plays out. But it'll be interesting to see it in its first go this year.
So with that, now I don't think Iowa's going to be in a situation that if they win their first game that they can relax in the second game, even with the loss still advance because of what it still matters for them in terms of the NCAA tournament. But a team like Oregon, that's built obviously a really good resume. That could be that if we do see that play out, if we do see a team that basically tanks their second game knowing we've already solidified a spot in the semifinals, do you think that'll lead to some restructuring of maybe the format of this one? Because it's bad for competition, right? If you have teams basically throwing away games in your conference tournament.
Yeah, the ACC used this for a couple of years, this format, and I would have to look to see how teams played that. What I will say is, to your point, I think Iowa, if Iowa loses 2 of 3 this weekend, they feel like they need to win the Big Ten tournament, or if they were to get swept or something like that, you bring in the factor with Reese Buter and his status being up in the air right now with him missing the start against Oregon State. If Iowa ran into a scenario where they say, I think we need to win the Big Ten tournament to get into the NCAA tournament, and Reese Buter is out, potentially, if that scenario presents itself where Kate Obermueller is able to go out and get you a win in the first game, and that upset does happen in that first game, and you are playing the 11 seed or you are playing the 12 seed, and you know that you've already clinched a spot in the semifinal. If Reese Buter's not available, you might be able to just say, hey, we need to just get this game out of the way, throw midweek arms, whatever you're going to do. So that way you have Aaron Savory available for the semifinal. And then you obviously have to kind of, piece it together on Sunday at the Big Ten Championship. But I do think if that's a pretty specific scenario where Iowa feels like they need to win the NCAA tournament and, Reese Buter's not available. But that would be the scenario where I think Iowa could do it. A team like Oregon, it depends, I guess, how much they want to try to win the Big Ten tournament. Because a team like Oregon or a team like UCLA or maybe even USC to a certain degree, they have their sights set on something bigger than just winning the Big Ten tournament. They already know that they're probably in the NCAA tournament. So I would, maybe Oregon and UCLA, I would expect them to just kind of throw their guys in order and say, let's not mess anything up. Let's keep our guys, on a routine for the NCAA tournament, because that would start the Friday after. So maybe give them an extra day of rest, because they would be able to pitch, potentially like a Wednesday, Thursday, and then your starter would get Wednesday to Friday off for rest. So I don't know that I'd see Oregon or UCLA doing that, but I could certainly see a team that is a top 4 seed down the road. Maybe it's not this year, but a year to come. If there's a team that does feel like they need to win the Big Ten tournament, they could potentially do that, just to try to save up their best arms. So I don't know that it'll happen this year. I think it would be a pretty specific scenario. But I do think if they keep this format for years to come, there will be a year where a team tries to do something like that.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday against Oregon before the Big Ten tournament in Omaha next week. Kyle Huesmann will have you covered over at Hawkeye Report. You can find him also on X. Kyle, you got a couple minutes to stick around, talk a little women's basketball?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, couple more minutes with Kyle here. We'll talk some women's basketball, including Iowa still shopping in the portal, the latest on Emily Rodriguez. We'll talk about that with Kyle next as we continue Locked On Hawkeyes. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, joined by Kyle Huesmann today. Kyle, wrapping things up with some women's basketball talk, another part of your beat with Hawkeye Report. A year number 1 of Jan Jensen that I think most everybody has to deem as pretty successful as we look back upon it. The bridge from Caitlin Clark era, obviously the retirement of Lisa Bluter, getting to the tournament, winning a game. What I maintain, though, is the importance right now of continuing this train down the road. And that Iowa on the jersey still means a whole lot on the national landscape. But, I've equated it to back now, you're not going to remember this one, but way back in the early 90s when Cheryl Swoops took Texas Tech to a national championship. They were a program that looked, but there was no sustainability. After she moved on, they had a little bit of success afterwards, but very quickly they kind of fell back into also-ran status. And I guess that's the pressure that's on Jan Jensen right now, not falling back to even what they were before Mega Gustafson and a team that could make the tournament, but to get back into that top 10 type of status. You follow the recruiting a whole lot. This year number 2 now of Jan Jensen, the importance of it in your mind of what they need to do to continue kind of the momentum of the women's basketball program.
Yeah, I think, more than transfer portal stuff, which we're going to get into in a second. I think it's more the high school recruiting side. We've seen some of the names that are popping up that Iowa's going after, and they're 4 and 5 stars, high 4 stars, and then some 5 stars. The answer to your question is going to be how many of those can they get? How many can they get to come to this program? And obviously Addie Deal is one of them. She's going to join the program this summer. And Journey Houston is a 4-star as well. So they've got some talented players. Layla Hayes is a 4-star as well at center. So they've got a pretty good class coming in, headlined by Addie Deal. And certainly the freshman class that played this year is a solid class. And I think they're going to continue to get better, and they're going to make their mark on the program. But you're going to need another class after that, and another class after that. And I think it starts with that 2026 recruiting class. Can you land a 5-star? Can you land one of those high 4 stars and kind of join them with, what was this last year's freshman class and the incoming freshman class? And that'll be the biggest thing is Jan did a great job of being able to keep the players that were on the roster when the change was made. She kept all those players. She kept, Deal, Houston, and then got Hayes. Hayes had not been committed when Jan took the job. So she was able to land Layla Hayes. So that was a great job to start off, but now she has to do the next part, which is start building this team, which is out of the transfer portal. This era of basketball and baseball and football, the transfer portal is a big part of it. But it's also going to be what can she do in this first recruiting class, this 2026 class, to try to continue things. And depending on what they can get out of that class, I think it's going to give you an idea of where Iowa stands on the national stage. If they land a couple of those high profile names, I think it shows you that Iowa, to, like you said, still means a lot because of what they were able to do over a couple of years. But if they aren't able to land a couple of them, maybe they do, like what you said, drop down a little bit to that team that is similar to this year, where maybe they're a contender to be in the Sweet 16, but the Final Four is probably not something that's in the cards on a yearly basis. But I think a lot of that stands on what happens with this 2026 recruiting class.
So one player that's going to be a part potentially next year is Emily Rodriguez from Central Florida, wing player. Some people maybe equated to a fill-in for Sydney Falter, doing some of the same type of things. Visited Iowa, as visiting Indiana, and kind of heard that myself. Thought, all right, maybe it's a two-team race. But you mentioned before we came on air here today that maybe that is not the case here for Emily Rodriguez. What can you tell us a little bit about her recruitment, what her fit would going to be, and maybe it's not just down to two with the Hawkeyes and the Hoosiers?
Yeah, she was in Iowa City for a visit. What is it? It's Wednesday now, Monday, and then part of Tuesday, and then went off to Indiana. She's presumably still there this morning. But yeah, so I think a lot of people thought Iowa and Indiana, when you hear those are the two visits. I've been told that the expectation is that she is going to take a couple more visits. How many? I'm not sure. But it doesn't sound like it is just Iowa and Indiana. And when we were talking before this, I mentioned that, the portal is closed. So no one else is going to enter, and no big name's going to enter, and where Rodriguez has to go, oh no, Iowa's going after a big name, or Indiana's going after a big name. She's kind of in a spot where she knows who's in the portal. She knows what teams are looking for. So she can take her time a little bit. So maybe that means taking, 2 more visits after Indiana, or 3 more visits, or 1 more visit, whatever she wants to do, and then really weigh her options. So I don't expect this to be a decision that comes, like tomorrow after her Indiana visit, or Friday or Saturday or something like that, which I think people kind of expected with the Iowa and Indiana visit being the only one that were publicized. But I was told the visit went well, so that's good for Iowa. She's a player that, is only going to be a sophomore, was an all-freshman selection in the Big 12 at UCF last year, and 11.9 points per game, 5.3 rebounds. So you mentioned, the rebounding they lose with Sita Fulter is there's a lot of rebounding there at that position, and generally teams don't lose a ton of rebounding when they lose a small forward, but Iowa did with Sita Fulter. And Rodriguez can rebound in her own right pretty well. 10 games last year with 6+ rebounds, had a season high 12 rebounds in one of her games. So can do that, and that's what Iowa's been looking for, is a little bit of rebounding help. A player that can drive and score in the paint, which is something that Iowa, you even go back to the Caitlin years, something that Iowa lacked outside of Caitlin was someone that could really get downhill and get to the hoop. I think Iowa has probably a couple more players that can do that now, but they'd love to have someone, that I think Rodriguez would probably be off the bench. For someone that can come off the bench and do something like that. So I think her fit would be kind of that small forward position, whether it's starting lineup or off the bench. Like I said, I think I would lean towards off the bench. But yeah, it's someone that would probably isn't going to be that splash transfer like Lucy Olson, but someone that can certainly come in and contribute, and has already done it at a Power 5 level, was a contributor for UCF this last season in the Big 12. So I think it'd be a good addition. And they obviously already got, Chit Chat Wright from Georgia Tech, who's going to come in and be a contributor guard. So not those high-level splash transfers, like I said, like Lucy Olson, but if they were able to get Rodriguez, I think you'd feel pretty good about what they would be able to get with Wright and Rodriguez.
So not knowing, obviously, what the finished product's going to be, and Rodriguez could change the equation, what's your expectation right now, just on the surface? I know things are not solidified across the Big Ten. What are your expectations right now, though, for the women's basketball team next year?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because we haven't seen any type of schedule or anything like that. Obviously, we know the Big Ten opponents, the home and away portion of it, but we haven't seen a non-conference schedule or anything like that. Obviously, it's going to be Iowa State, it's going to be UNI, it's going to be Drake, but we don't know. Is there going to be a tournament in there? What's going to be the non-conference opponents? So that'll certainly matter to a certain extent. I think this is going to be maybe a similar team to last year, where NCAA tournament's probably a good starting point, and then if you can make a Sweet 16, I think that would be good. But a lot of it is going to come down to we talked about the freshman class this past year. What kind of strides can they make? What kind of strides can Ava Hayden make at the center position? Because I do think she's going to be the starting center this next year. We saw her abilities very late in the season, kind of the Big Ten tournament and NCAA tournament, what she can do. What steps can she make over the offseason? What steps can, a Tegan Mullaney make? She didn't have necessarily the role that I think some people and myself thought that she would have. What steps can she take going into her sophomore year to potentially get a bigger role? You talk about someone like Taylor Stremlow. What steps can she take? And then certainly Addie Deal. What is she going to be for this team when she comes in for a true freshman season? I think she can absolutely be a starter, and I think she will be a starter right off the jump in game one. I look at what Michigan had this past year with Olivia Olson and Silas Swords. They were both players that averaged double figures, and they recruiting rankings aren't everything, but Addie Deal is in that same area that they were in terms of recruiting ranking. So I think Addie Deal can absolutely come in and have that type of impact. Maybe not 16 to 18 points a game, but maybe a double-digit score for Iowa. But there are a lot of questions with some of the younger players on this roster. What can they do in terms of taking a step up? What can Journey Houston do? What can Layla Hayes do in their freshman year? But you do have a couple of veterans. Kylie Feuerbach's going to be back. Taylor McCabe's going to be back. Hannah Stolke's going to be back. So I think it's a solid team. It's not a team that I'm going to say is going to go to an Elite Eight or something like that. But I still think it's an NCAA tournament level team. And certainly, looking at what happens with the portal, I mean, Chit Chat Wright's going to be certainly in there as a guard. I think she could potentially be a starter, depending on what Iowa wants to do at point guard. But yeah, like I said, I think it's a solid team. I don't know that I would say it's a great team, but I think the expectation would be similar to what it was last season.
A great look at Iowa women's basketball and Iowa baseball. Kyle Huesmann joins us today here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Kyle, appreciate it. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Thursday through Saturday, Kyle will have you covered in Iowa City for the Iowa baseball team, and then they'll make their way over to the wrong side of the river, over to Omaha, coming up next weekend for the Big Ten baseball tournament. That's Kyle Huesmann, HawkeyeReport.com. Give him a follow on social media. He'll keep you updated on all things Hawkeyes. I'm Trent Condon. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.